This program is supported by Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro Northern Cement, Ahon, Bangon, Sulong, and SMC Global Power.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. The death toll from the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year surged to 375 as desperate survivors pleaded for urgent supplies of drinking water and food. With no mobile signal or internet to contact loved ones, typhoon survivors stranded on a devastated Philippine island have written letters to reassure worried relatives they are alive. The streets of Santiago erupted in celebration after leftist millennial Gabriel Boric became Chile's youngest ever president-elect with an unexpectedly large victory over his far-right rival in a polarizing race. And our EBC correspondent Kevin Cortez will give us the details. A Japanese billionaire returned to Earth on Monday after 12 days spent on the International Space Station, where he made videos about performing mundane tasks in space, including brushing his teeth and going to the bathroom. First in our news, the death toll from the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year surged to 375 today as desperate survivors pleaded for urgent supplies of drinking water and food. Take a look. The Philippine Red Cross reported complete carnage in coastal areas after Super Typhoon Rai left homes, hospitals, and schools ripped to shreds. The storm tore off roofs, uprooted trees, toppled concrete power poles, smashed wooden houses to pieces, wiped out crops, and flooded villages, sparking comparisons to the damage caused by Super Typhoon Haiyan back in 2013. At least 375 people were killed, 56 missing in the latest disaster to hit the archipelago, with 500 more injured, according to the National Police. More than 380,000 people fled their homes and beachfront resorts as Rai slammed into the country on Thursday. One of the hardest hit islands was Bohol, known for its beaches, chocolate hills, and tiny tarsier primates, where at least 94 people have died, according to Provincial Governor Arthur Yap on his Facebook page. In Bohol's coastal town of Ubay, a state of calamity has been declared, with many wooden houses flattened and fishing boats destroyed. A senior official of the National Disaster Agency said he had not expected as many deaths. Meanwhile, survivors of Typhoon Rai pleaded for urgent supplies of drinking water and food as the death toll from the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year surpassed 300. Let's listen in.
Nagbigay sila ng kahit man lang isang bumbiro ng tubig, yun lang.
Kahit yun, ma'am, wala.
Yun lang, wala. Walang nagpakita. Iwan ko kung nasaan yung mga politisyan, mga politiko at saka yung mga kandidato. Tingnan natin. Pag pumasok sila, sunod, matikman nila ang lahat. Matikman nila ang sakit ng mga tao na sasabihin ng mga tao. Sobra sila di mga iwan ko.
Kasi buong Surigao City, Norte, kahit doon sa kabila sa isla, sir, talagang apektado lahat, sir. Walang pinalagpas. Lahat talaga apektado. Kaya kung sino man yung mga nasa katungkulan, inaano namin na sana mapansin nyo man. Kung hindi nyo man kami napansin, hindi nyo man nakita yung anong sitwasyon namin.
The death toll, as earlier mentioned, from the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year surpassed 300 as desperate survivors pleaded for urgent supplies of drinking water and food. Super Typhoon Rai is the most powerful to hit the Philippines this year, and it comes late in the region's typhoon season, with most cyclones developing between July and October. Scientists have long warned that rising global temperatures induced by man-made climate change are causing typhoons to become more powerful and strengthen more rapidly. With no mobile signal or internet to contact loved ones, typhoon survivors stranded on the devastated Philippine island have written letters to reassure worried relatives that they are alive. Photos of the touching missives were posted Monday on the Facebook page of Dinagat Island's Governor Arlene Bagao, who has been able to get online during trips to the neighboring island of Mindanao, where she is seeking help for her constituents. At least 14 people died in Dinagat Islands when Super Typhoon Rai hit Thursday, tearing houses to pieces, toppling concrete power poles, and smashing fishing boats. The national death toll from the strongest typhoon to hit the country surpassed 300, nearing 400 even. Many of Dinagat's 128,000 residents sheltered in evacuation centers ahead of the storm and are now homeless. There is also a shortage of drinking water and food, according to officials. After receiving requests for updates on the situation, Bagao urged people to write letters to their families outside Dinagat to let them know they were safe. In other news, more than 30,000 people were evacuated from their homes in Malaysia on Sunday as the country battled some of its worst flooding in years. Take a look.
I mean, flood in KL are quite normal, but it's not that massive. But this is really a massive one. I think I can consider as a second big flood in KL. Back in 1971, there's a biggest flood in KL. So now, just 50 years. Now another big flood here, so this is a disaster for us. Very sad, but we have no choice. There's only choice that we have to move on and we clean up the mess. Then we will continue our new chapter.
Some of the houses they already come out, but there are still people refuse to come out. They want to stay at their second floor. But I really hope that for safety purpose, please come out lah.
The tropical Southeast Asian nation often sees stormy months and seasons towards the end of the year, with flooding regularly prompting mass evacuations. Downpours since Friday have caused rivers to overflow, submerging many urban areas and cutting off major roads, leaving thousands of motorists stranded. More than 30,000 flood victims across 8 states and territories were recorded on an official government website, with over 14,000 of them in the central state of Pahang. Nearly 10,000 people fled their homes in the country's richest state of Selangor, which surrounds the capital Kuala Lumpur, with Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob expressing surprise at the severe flooding there. The Premier promised swift aid for the flood victims and initial funding of 100 million ringgit, or $23.7 million to repair the damaged houses and infrastructure. Now to pandemic news, the COVID-19 alert level 2 status in Metro Manila will remain for the rest of the year, despite the detection of a third Omicron variant case in the country, according to National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. The vaccine czar said the possible amendment on the alert level status will be based on the epidemiological recommendations of the Department of Health, considering key factors on cases, surge, and hospitalization rate. Galvez said there is a continuing decline in COVID cases in the country, with just 9,592 active infections as of Monday. Still, he cautioned the public against complacency amid the downtrend. Mr. Galvez thanked anew LGUs and the private sector for proactively participating in the national COVID-19 vaccination days. Vaccinations do not prevent infections, but rather prevent severe disease. Here's Dr. Jaime Montoya, Executive Director of the DOST Philippine Council for Health Research and Development. Take a look.
Dahil po itong mga bakuna naman natin, alam naman natin yan, na yung mga bakuna na currently nabigyan ng emergency use authorization does not prevent infection. Ang piniprevent niya po ay yung komplikadong sakit na mangangailangan ng hospitalization at maaaring ikamatay. So yun po ang nagagawa niya. Pero yung pong para mag-prevent ng infection, hindi pa po yan nagagawa ng kahit ano dito sa mga bakuna na nabigyan ng EUA. Kaya nga po patuloy pa po ang pag-aaral natin dahil hindi pa po natin nakikita yung bakuna na tinatawag na complete protection ang maibibigay. In other words, hindi lang po protection against complicated disease or hospitalization or death, pero protection against infection din. So, ang herd immunity po, ang assumption po dyan, mape-prevent ang infection. No? So, may kakulangan pa po yung mga bakuna natin sa kasalukuyan na nabigyan ng EUA. Kaya medyo mataas po ang requirement para maka-achieve tayo ng herd immunity o tinatawag na population protection.
Staying in the country, the government has administered around 2.5 million doses of COVID vaccines during the second Bayanihan Bakunahan drive from December 15 to 18, according to a Department of Health official today. In a televised Laging Handa public briefing, DOH Undersecretary Mirna Kabutahe said the administered vaccines don't include 639 LGUs in Mimaropa, Region 6, Western Visayas, 7 Central Visayas, 8 Eastern Visayas, and Caraga, where inoculation activities were canceled due to Typhoon Odette. Take a look.
Ang napagkayarian po, pag-iibayuhin yung NCR CAR 1234A, ang ituloy-tuloy pa rin yung bakunahan. Tapos uumpisahan na po yung sa mga naudlot sa Region 5, Region Mimaropa, 6, 7, 8, and Caraga. Baka yung Region 7, hindi natin alam kung ano pa yung mangyayari. But in Region 6, there are a few areas na hindi nagbakuna. Sa Region Caraga, mga dalawang areas din ang hindi pa magre-resume ng bakunan. But majority will already start their full blast ng vaccination ngayong araw na ito.
Meanwhile, COVID-19 cases is on the rise in British Columbia as they have announced new curbs or restrictions. Here is Vanessa Condi from our EBC Canada Bureau.
On Thursday, BC announced 753 new cases of COVID-19, which is more than doubled since last week. 135 of the new cases were the Omicron variant. To mitigate the risk, BC's Health Minister, Adrian Dix, has announced in a health conference.
First of all, with respect to the travel guidelines by the federal government not to travel internationally for non-essential travel, as the Premier has noted in his statement, we support this effort, we support this advice, we support these guidelines, and it's pretty simple. If it's not necessary, don't go. We're seeing a very significant growth in the Omicron variant of concern across the world and in different parts of Canada. Here in British Columbia, yes, but even more so in other parts of Canada. Such that, as we heard from Ontario today, there's an expectation that the Omicron variant of concern will become the dominant variant of concern in that province. And when you consider a very short time ago we had not heard of it, that tells you how quickly events have been and are moving across the country and indeed across the world.
Dr. Bonnie Henry has also announced some restrictions.
And will be in place starting on midnight on Sunday, so we'll start on Monday morning and extend through to January 31st, 2022. These amendments are about ensuring everyone is staying small, staying with the people they know, and with people who are vaccinated. Firstly, the events and gatherings order will be amended so to include all indoor personal gatherings, including at rentals, vacation properties, resorts, are limited to your household or the residents, plus no more than 10 additional individuals, or one other household. And this is if everybody is vaccinated. For events, on our BC vaccine card, proof of vaccine with the BC vaccine card is required no matter the size of events. It no longer starts with events including 50 or more people, which has been the case for the last few months.
Sports tournaments will also be cancelled or postponed through to the end of January. There will also be restrictions in moving around in restaurants and mingling. Dr. Bonnie Henry is hoping these restrictions will flatten the number of cases. In Victoria, BC, Vanessa Condi, Eagle News, we live in interesting times.
Thank you, Vanessa. Meanwhile, Israel's health ministry recommended banning Israelis from traveling to the U.S. and added several European countries to its COVID red list, aimed at containing the Omicron variant spread. Barring U.S. travel for Israeli citizens and residents would mark a significant step for Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's government, given the hundreds of thousands of dual nationals and close ties between the countries. The Prime Minister said Israel was in the midst of its fifth wave of COVID-19. Take a look.
רבותיי, הזמן שקנינו הולך ואוזל. האומיקרון כבר בארץ, מהכנסת ועד לגני הילדים, והוא מתפשט מהר. המספרים עדיין לא גבוהים, אבל זה וריאנט מדבק ביותר, ובקצב הכפלה של כל יומיים שלושה, כמו שאנחנו רואים בכל העולם, ניתן לומר שהגל החמישי החל.
Speaking earlier, Bennett reiterated that he would continue to restrict travel in order to avoid further lockdowns. He said Israel had gained precious time by curbing travel immediately after the Omicron variant was detected in South Africa last month. Lawmakers on Sunday approved an earlier health ministry recommendation to bar Israeli citizens and residents from traveling to France, Ireland, Norway, Spain, Finland, Sweden, and the United Arab Emirates. Britain and Denmark were already on the red list, as was most of Africa. In addition to the U.S., the health ministry recommended that Canada, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Morocco, Portugal, Switzerland, and Turkey be red listed, guidance that is awaiting approval from the government and lawmakers. Israeli citizens and residents who are already abroad when a country is declared red must quarantine for a week after returning home. Non-resident foreigners from all countries are barred from entry unless they have special permission. Bennett called on Israelis to work from home and encouraged parents to vaccinate their children. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has returned to work after spending a week in isolation following a positive test, according to his office on Monday. Ramaphosa, 69, who's fully vaccinated, felt unwell after leaving a state memorial service for former President F.W. de Klerk in Cape Town on December 12, as his nation battles an exponential increase in cases of the Omicron coronavirus variant. South Africa, where the highly mutated Omicron variant was first detected last month, is Africa's worst hit country, according to official tallies of virus cases, with more than 3.3 million infections logged and more than 90,000 deaths. Meanwhile, top U.S. pandemic advisor Anthony Fauci warned of a bleak winter ahead as the Omicron coronavirus variant spurs a new wave of infections globally, sparking restrictions and concerns over hospital capacity. One thing he said that's very clear is Omicron's extraordinary capability of spreading. Fauci told NBC News, he said it is just raging throughout the world. Despite indications it is not more severe than the Delta variant, currently still the dominant strain, the heavily mutated Omicron has been shown in early data to have a worrying resistance to vaccines and higher transmissibility. Dr. Fauci also cautioned against too much optimism over Omicron's severity, noting that in South Africa, while the hospitalization to case ratio is lower than with Delta, this could be due to underlying immunity from widespread previous infections. He said, no matter how you look at it, when you have so many infections, even if it's less severe, that overcomes this slight to moderate diminution in severity, unquote. Paris on Saturday said it was calling off its New Year fireworks as Europe braced for tighter curbs to rein in a highly mutated strain on the coronavirus that is fueling a resurgence in COVID cases across the world. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has warned that the Omicron variant could be dominant in Europe by mid-February. Many countries have decided to reintroduce travel restrictions and other containment measures since it was first detected in South Africa last month. A scientific scientific panel that advises the French government urged significant restrictions on New Year festivities. And the capital announced with regret that it was canceling all events on the Champs-Élysées. On Friday, Germany designated France and Denmark as high-risk zones and said unvaccinated travelers would have to quarantine. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Turning our attention to Chile, where Gabriel Boric's supporters are celebrating his presidential election victory at 35 years of age. The millennial and the former student activist turned legislator becomes the youngest president of Chile. Kevin Cortez from our Chile Bureau brings us the details.
The streets of Santiago erupted Sunday in celebration after leftist millennial Gabriel Boric became Chile's youngest president-elect. The streets of Santiago erupted in celebration Sunday after leftist millennial Gabriel Boric became Chile's youngest ever president-elect with an unexpectedly large victory over his far-right rival in a polarizing race. Boric, 35, garnered nearly 56% of the vote compared to 44% for ultra-conservative Jose Antonio Cast, who conceded even before the final result was known. Tens of thousands of Chileans took the streets of the capital and other cities after Cast's concession, honking car horns in approval, brandishing pro-Boric placards, waving the rainbow LGBTQ flag, and shouting "Viva Chile!" Boric had campaigned on a promise of installing a social welfare state, increasing taxes and social spending in a country with one of the world's largest gaps between rich and poor. Branded a communist by his detractors, he vowed in his first official address Sunday to expand social rights in Chile, but to do so with fiscal responsibility. Cast congratulated Boric, who leads an alliance that includes Chile's Communist Party, on his great triumph. Cast is an apologist for brutal dictator Augusto Pinochet and his neoliberal economic model, credited for Chile's relative wealth but blamed for its deep-rooted social inequality. He opposes same-sex marriage, contraception, and abortion, and had initially pledged to close the Ministry of Women's Affairs, a promise he later rode back on. According to a projection by Chile's surveilled election body, turnout was more than 55%, a record since voting became voluntary in 2012. Boric won by a margin of nearly a million ballots out of 8.3 million cast by 15 million eligible voters. Chile is going through profound change after voting overwhelmingly last year in favor of drawing a new constitution to replace the one enacted in the Pinochet years. The 2020 referendum was in response to an anti-inequality social uprising in 2019 that left dozens dead. The drafting process in the hands of the largely left-leaning body elected in May must seal the constitution for approval next year on the new president's watch. President Sebastián Piñera said Sunday the country was living in an environment of excessive polarization, confrontation, disputes. Piñera urged his successor before that the result was known to never forget he will be the president of Chileans, and not just by those who support him. Reporting for Eagle News International, this is Kevin Cortez, Chile Bureau. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Alma.
Thank you, Kevin. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's leader on Monday hailed the outcome of a Patriots-only legislature election that saw record low voter turnout and government loyalists sweep every seat. Take a look.
不過，如果一個好高嘅投票率係建基於個政治嘅劣質化甚至係建基於有部分嘅候選人係藉此爭奪政權去危害國家安全，呢個唔係值得我哋係好認同嘅高投票率。同樣地，一個高投票率如果係建基於社會嘅極端嘅兩極化，等於我哋喺2019年見到嘅黃藍嘅分野，呢個亦都唔係一個值得大家好開心嘅高投票率。第三就係如果呢個高投票率係建基於候選人互相污名化，甚至用暴力去破壞其他嘅候選人嘅選舉嘅工程，呢個亦都唔係一個會令到我哋社會進步。
The financial hub selected new lawmakers on Sunday under fresh rules imposed by Beijing that dramatically cut directly elected seats and controlled who could stand for office after huge democracy protests convulsed the city 2 years ago. Figures show just 30% of the electorate cast ballots, the lowest rate both of the period since the city's 1997 handover to China and the British colonial era. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam defended the new system and played down the turnout. Chinese state media portrayed the elections as a glowing success. The official Xinhua news agency said the vote had crushed lies from external forces while demonstrating the true will of the people in the Chinese city. Tao Kung Pao newspaper, which answers to a Chinese government office that sets Hong Kong policy, described the vote as, quote, the most successful one since handover. Mrs. Lam will fly to Beijing on Monday to meet with Chinese leaders as focus shifts to whether she will get backing for a second term in March, when a 1,500-strong committee stacked with Beijing loyalists will pick the city's next leader. Back to pandemic news. Protesters threw projectiles at the police who conducted arrests following a demonstration against COVID-19 restrictions in Brussels. The crowd that marched from the Gare du Nord railway to a park in the city's European quarter was smaller than in two previous protests, according to 3,500 people. Around 3,500 people, according to the police. Let's listen in.
C'est le même message qu'on a fait passer lors de l'acte 1 et 2, c'est-à-dire mettre un arrêt contre l'obligation vaccinale pour le corps médical et stopper également le Covid Safety Kit.
Belgium is recording around 10,000 new COVID cases per day as the Omicron variant spreads in Europe. And authorities have again begun to tighten public health rules. Prime Minister Alexander De Cruz's government will meet on Wednesday to decide on any new measures. And the neighboring Netherlands has already ordered a lockdown for the holidays. Belgium has run a relatively successful vaccine campaign and has begun issuing booster shots, but a vocal minority is wary of compulsory jabs and certificates or opposes lockdown measures. In other news now, the eruption of a volcano in Iceland, which drew hundreds of thousands of tourists and was the longest in 50 years, has been declared officially over, according to authorities today. It's been 3 months since lava last came out, so this eruption is now considered over, according to Bryndis Weir Tislat-Dorir, specialist in natural hazards at the Icelandic Meteorological Institute. But the agency, which monitors volcanic activity, nevertheless called on hikers to be cautious, and it will continue to monitor the area. The eruption of the lava began on March 19. Lava had not flowed for 8 centuries of the Reykjanes Peninsula and for nearly 6,000 years where the eruption occurred, according to volcanologists. But this eruption, the 6th in Iceland in the last 20 years, became the longest recorded in half a century as it spewed lava for 6 months. In other news, nearly 1 in 4 people in Somalia are facing acute hunger as drought ravages the conflict-racked country following 3 seasons of poor rains and a 4th on the way, according to the United Nations on Monday. The crisis is expected to worsen, leaving 4.6 million people in desperate need of food aid by May 2022, according to the UN, adding that the country had not seen a 3rd consecutive failed rainy season in over 30 years. Shortages of food, water, and land for grazing have already forced 169,000 people to flee their homes, with that number projected to hit 1.4 million within 6 months, according to the United Nations in a statement. In recent years, natural disasters, not conflict, have been the main driver of displacement in Somalia, a war-torn nation that ranks among the world's most vulnerable to climate change. It is a perfect storm that is gathering, according to Adam Abdelmullah, the UN humanitarian coordinator for Somalia, telling AFP in an interview, warning that 300,000 children aged 5 and under were at risk of severe malnutrition in the coming months. The news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be back with the business news right after this.
Pangarap ng bawat Pilipino, hangarin ng Northern Cement. Ahon! Bangon! Sulong! Pinalaki ng Northern Cement ang kapasidad ng kanilang planta para steady ang supply ng sementong tigasin. Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro. Ahon! Bangon! Sulong!
Welcome back. Japan's parliament enacted a record supplementary budget worth over $300 billion today as part of measures to bolster the world's third largest economy as the pandemic threat drags on. The extra budget, larger than the total annual GDP of countries such as Colombia, Vietnam, and Finland, will fund part of the massive virus stimulus package announced last month by new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Upper House lawmakers approved the 35.98 trillion yen or $317 billion supplementary budget for the current fiscal year, with the majority allocated for economic measures. And they include cash handouts for children under 18, subsidies for small businesses, and pay rises for nurses and caregivers. Japan passed 3 extra budgets in fiscal 2020 to 21 as manufacturing slowed during the pandemic and restrictions hit nightlife and tourism. But this marks the first for 2021 to 2022 and the biggest yet. Meanwhile, world oil prices fell by more than 5% today as energy demand fears grew over the fast-spreading Omicron coronavirus variant. In morning deals, Brent North Sea crude tumbled 5.1% to $69.79 per barrel, and New York's West Texas Intermediate oil lost 5.7% to $66.84. The rapid spread of Omicron has slammed the oil market and broader global stock markets on concerns about economic fallout as countries revert back to containment measures. For crude oil, it's all about demand concerns right now, according to Think Markets analyst Fawad Razagsara. Travel restrictions, he said, have been tightened across most of Europe, and there is the potential for more measures to be announced in the coming days. Dubai Airport, one of the world's busiest travel hubs, is fully operational for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic erupted in March 2020, according to officials today. The opening of the sections closed as the COVID-19 crisis took hold comes as the United Arab Emirates records a rise of infections amid fears of the new Omicron variant. Travel via Dubai increases at the end of the year, with foreigners who make up the majority of the Emirates' population heading home for the holidays, while visitors come to celebrate the new year. Last year, Dubai International Airport reported a 70% drop in traffic from more than 86 million travelers in 2019 to 25.9 million in 2020. Tourism is an economic mainstay of Dubai, which welcomed 16.7 million visitors in 2019. And this just in, the World Economic Forum said today it will defer its annual meeting in Davos in light of continued uncertainty over the Omicron variant of coronavirus. The high-powered meeting, which usually draws leading figures from business, politics, and diplomacy, will instead be held in early summer, according to the organizers. Last year's edition was canceled because of the pandemic. Rafa Nadal said Monday he has tested positive for COVID-19 on his return to Spain from Abu Dhabi, where he took part in an exhibition tournament last week. I am going through some unpleasant moments, but I trust that I will improve little by little. I am now confined at home and have informed the people who had been in contact with me, he wrote on Twitter. As a consequence of the situation, I have to have total flexibility with my calendar, and I will analyze my options depending on my evolution, the 35-year-old added. He said, I will keep you informed of any decisions about my future tournaments. The Spanish former world number 1 had been due to fly to Melbourne later this month to compete in an ATP event ahead of the Australian Open. The 20-time major champion has struggled with a foot injury for the Open. Nadal lost to another former world number 1, Andy Murray, in an exhibition last Friday in Abu Dhabi, his first match since August. He then lost to Wimbledon semifinals Denis Shapovalov of Canada on Saturday. In other sports news, Premier League chiefs will meet on Monday to discuss a potential festive firebreaker as a result of the escalating coronavirus crisis, with managers voicing fears over player safety and fairness. Just 4 of the scheduled 10 games took place this weekend due to a number of call-offs caused by outbreaks that left clubs unable to field teams. Despite record numbers of COVID cases across Britain as the Omicron variant sweeps through the nation, the Premier League has so far insisted the show must go on where safely possible. So far, the league has been considering applications for postponements on a case-by-case basis, but there has been criticism over the decision-making process. Managers forced to balance the well-being of their players with the need for results say there has been a lack of clarity over why some games are postponed but others allowed to go ahead. Chelsea have fallen 6 points behind Manchester City at the top of the table, while after draws with Everton and Wolves over the past week while dealing with a worsening outbreak. The European champions' application to have their match at Wolves on Sunday called off was rejected even though they had 7 positive cases. And the NBA announced the postponement of 5 games on Sunday amid a rising tide of COVID cases around the league. 3 of the 9 games scheduled for Sunday were postponed: Denver at Brooklyn, Cleveland at Atlanta, and New Orleans at Philadelphia. In addition, Orlando's game at Toronto scheduled for Monday and Washington at Brooklyn scheduled for Tuesday were also postponed. The next games for the Cleveland Cavaliers, Orlando Magic, and Philadelphia 76ers, as well as the next 2 games for the Brooklyn Nets, have been postponed because of players and staff members entering NBA health and safety protocols, according to the league in a statement. And the move comes after ESPN reported that 5 Cavaliers players, including center Jarrett Allen, tested positive for COVID-19, joining Evan Mobley and Isaac Okoro on the list of players unavailable in COVID protocols. And Eagle News will be right back after this break.
Hindi ka na mauuli sa latest at what's trending kada umaga.
Welcome back. A Japanese billionaire returned to Earth today after 12 days spent on the International Space Station, where he made videos about performing mundane tasks in space. And that includes brushing his teeth and going to the bathroom. Online fashion tycoon Yusaku Maezawa and his assistant Yozo Hirano parachuted into Kazakhstan steep at around the expected landing time of 03:30 GMT on Monday, along with Russian cosmonaut Alexander Misrykin. Footage from the landing site, around 150 kilometers or 90 miles southeast of the central Kazakhstan town of Shezkazgan, showed the trio smiling after being helped out of the Soyuz descent module and into evacuation vehicles and freezing, foggy conditions. Russia's defense ministry had said on Sunday that Maezawa and Hirano were said to be surprised by a recovery cruise with a traditional Japanese noodle dish. Their journey marked Russia's return to space tourism after a decade-long pause that saw the rise of competition from the United States. The trio spent 12 days on the orbiting laboratory, where the Japanese tourists documented their daily life aboard the ISS for Maezawa's popular YouTube channel. Maezawa plans to take 8 people with him on a 2023 mission around the moon, operated by Elon Musk's SpaceX. He and his assistant are the first private Japanese citizens to visit space since journalist Toyohiro Akiyama traveled to the MIR station in 1990. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you all for joining us. And at the end of the day, as I always say, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles. We'll see you back tomorrow. We live in interesting times. Good night.
This program is supported by Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro Northern Cement, Ahon, Bangon, Sulong, and SMC Global Power.